So we are gathered here today, really to just reminisce. It's just me and James. I don't know what we're going to call this. Really, there's no label to what we're talking about, I guess. You want to call it a space heater chat? Because that's basically what we're doing. Fireside.
Yeah,
We're just
yeah,
firesiding
fireside chat. Yeah,
it.
no,
So essentially, this is a space heater chat. I think that's the best way to put it.
but yeah, 15 years. That is quite a long time. It just
Well, that's the
makes you feel
reason.
your age, doesn't it? It's like, especially since we started out in the basement there of Bethune College in a classroom.
Yeah, in York University. Well, we eventually moved to the basement. I guess we should go a little bit. Well, first of all, March 2nd marked the 15th anniversary. The first episode of Anime Roundtable was taped on March 2nd, 2006. And I have to look this up.
Actually, you're right. It was the third floor because it was
We
across
were,
from the
yeah.
gallery and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then we moved to the. You're right. That tells you how 15 years can play with your mind, doesn't it, Mike?
Or blur your memory, which it has
But
badly
no, we
done.
were up on that third floor for a while for many of the first episodes. And then, as you said, when they redid the bottom of Bethune College for the club rooms, the anime club Yama, that's where we ended up doing a lion's share of the final part of part one.
Version one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
most of
then, of
version
course,
one was taped in that building by far, right? I think.
and then, as you said, version two, we moved to your
Well,
apartment. And then, of course, we've been doing these online ones for most
or
of 2020. And then we've
pretty
had
much
a
the
few
last
at a
year.
few other locations here and there that have been special conversations, especially the Visser brothers inviting us to Comic Den before they finally closed it down. That's when I don't think me or you will ever forget.
Mm-hmm.
Like even them inviting us to their home because that was very gracious of them, and they were always a good chat, as you said, both the episodes we did with them and just when we interacted and were customers of theirs for many years.
Right. Well, it helps to be a customer. According to SoundCloud, we have 155 tracks up on the SoundCloud, but there are 3 duplicates, so it's really 152 tracks. So officially, there's like 152 some odd recordings we've done. I would say give or take. So 155 is probably an accurate number. It's not far off anyway. So that's how long we've hit the record buttons and posted up stuff and what have you.
And even
Uh,
with the 8 year break, that's still a lot
a
of
fair amount.
recordings, still
Fair
a lot of
amount.
minutes discussed and shared with many people across the internet who ever decided to listen. And
Hmm.
it's been a
I
fun
mean,
ride.
I mean, I don't know how rated numbers are. I guess we rate them enough because we put episode numbers on these files as well. But then you hear shows that are like in the 200s or 500s. I know Anime Addicts Anonymous, they're like in the 500s or maybe 600s if memory serves me right. I should check where Anime World Order sits in terms of number of episodes. And we're doing this all on the fly. 197 as of end of February. So they're about to go into an official 200th episode.
So we've been similar timelines and stuff like that, but yeah, it's like we've both taken our breaks and
Oh,
stuff like that here
well,
and there, and they took longer between episodes, don't forget, because they weren't
keep in
as
mind
weekly
when we
as we
say
were originally.
it comes with a caveat though. 100
Hmm.
when we say 155, yes, it's regular episodes. Yes, it's the digests, which I think will be something we don't really use anymore, a moniker for recordings we don't use anymore. And then it's of course the solo shots that I've done and you've done, and I think just Megan Swain, I think is the only other person to have done a solo shot of any sort, or maybe Enrico as well.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, we've had so many people that we talked about, Clarissa, Angela, of course, Neil and Dean, and then like the list goes on and on and on and on
Yeah,
of
well,
people that we had friends
we
and
better mention
people.
Adam because if he
Adam,
ever
yeah, I
hears
know.
this and we don't mention him, he'll kick our ass in some form.
Well, I
Although
think
he's
he'd
not,
more likely sue our ass, but hey.
I don't think he'd be listening for starters. That's the other part in all of this.
But
So
we
yeah,
had so many people that were very gracious enough
mhm.
to come on the
Courtney,
mic and
did
stuff
you
like
say
that. I'm
Courtney?
sure they're.
Did
Yeah,
you
I
say
thought I
Courtney?
said Courtney. I
Okay.
thought I said Courtney, but I might not have said Courtney. There were a lot of people. We had a lot of people come on this mic, and that was very big of them to do that because
Yeah, especially.
it's just them coming on to share some opinions with some friends and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't always want to do that, right?
Well, that's one of the things about doing a podcast back then and then now. And I kind of start to learn these make these observations the wrong way as we brought back the show in 2018. There's that old phrase, video killed the radio star, right? When music videos became in vogue, but radio kind of endured anyway,
Hmm.
in another form, I suppose. And podcasts were meant to be, I guess, I suppose, a chance for people who don't have those platforms, don't have broadcasting platforms to be able to express themselves to a wider audience. In some ways wide, in some ways a little bit more narrow because you're trying to promote yourself to people with similar interests. But then I guess in the 8 years we were off and not around, it kind of shifted a little bit to become extensions of, well, popular podcasts became extensions of other brands, of mainstream brands or celebrity brands or of radio brands, right? Podcasts became an extension of radio personalities. Either you can get hear a recording of a past episode they did, or you can hear a celebrity have their own show and give their own take on various things. So,
And you can either do that in the comfort of your car, or if you want to do it on your phone or your computer and actually
mhm.
watch the video version, you can. And that's
Well,
where
it's
YouTube and Twitch have come in too, of course,
yeah,
right?
but
Over the past thing.
I think the dilemma in all of this is, in many respects, going back to the popular cliche, radio might have just killed the podcasting star. So, finding our way in all of this now as we've returned, it's probably a losing proposition, I suppose. So you have to kind of take a look at what you want to do with this show now. I mean, that's sort of the realization I've come to after 3 years of being back. And maybe I've, maybe looking, when I look back on it, it was easy to promote something when there weren't too many podcasts back then in like the 2006 couple years we were there.
Hmm.
There weren't many anime podcasts. Now there's a dime a dozen. But I think I'm wondering how much. Well, it's obvious that YouTube has also had a big play in it. You just mentioned videos. And I know when you listen to Anime World Order, one big thing Daryl Surat would often say is if you're starting an anime podcast from scratch now, have a video component. And maybe that's the case for all. And I constantly go on at least Facebook groups that talk about, well, the benefits of having a video component, which I know would be quite a bit of work. We're actually taping this in Zencaster's newer version, which allows for actual video video chat as well. But it's unlikely we'll put up the video for this because, well, one, I don't really know how to do it myself. I could learn, I suppose. It's just can't say it's the easiest thing I'd not the easiest thing. It's just I don't give myself the time to learn it right now.
It's something to think about, as we said, and we did say that Zencaster is changing, I guess, with the times and stuff like that. So we're going to see how this new version plays out and stuff like that. Because I know Kevin always has been talking to us this year through mobile and the mobile app with the new version of Zencaster. I know you were saying it's still a work in progress.
It's fine. This is looking at this interface. It's actually quite slick and quite nice, but it's yeah, it can make complications because it does require certain types of hardware, and Kevin doesn't have that. So for a little while, I guess we're going to still be strictly audio. But also there's just a little bit more care you have to put, a little bit more editing, a little bit more know-how into doing a video. And I'll be honest, I don't have that at the moment. I guess I could take some time to learn. I have heavens knows. I've already stated that I'm not working right now as the pandemic continues. So, but it's I don't know where we sit right now in terms of this podcast, right? Like, I'm happy to be able to express myself in this form. I'm sure everybody who comes on this show is happy to share their opinions. But I do see some of those analytics, and I know, frankly speaking, not many do listen to this show. I think we're if I'm to believe SoundCloud's analytics, we're lucky to get 30 people. I think that's considered a small victory, and more than likely, most of them are friends. So I know it was a little easier for us back then. We actually did have just stray listeners. And when we actually disappeared, or more like I disappeared, I kept getting the odd message about where the hell are we? So,
As you said, it's hard to build it back up, especially with how it is now. But
mhm,
I'm sure we're going to still be at it, continuing on, soldiering on. We've been actually doing more episodes, like every 2 weeks and stuff like that. So we have
yeah.
been ramping up, and then I know you've been exploring other avenues to promote, as you said, even though it's a different world. But if we get a few listeners bit by bit, it never hurts.
I think all you could really do is just keep going and promise to not leave, which we did, right? And that's okay.
And then we have done some different things too with this version, as we said. We did a few interviews. We did Fred Shot, and yes, that tied into us being at Anime North and stuff like that. And then we did the interview with Matt Alt and stuff like that. And you never know, we might do
I
another one somewhere
I
down the line,
interviewed.
depending if we find someone that we feel we could do an interesting chat with, because the chats
Mhm.
we did with Matt Alt and Fred Shot, I think, really worked into what we do with the casual conversations.
Well, and then I spoke with Kat Callahan just
Yeah,
after
no, of course,
the death
yes,
of
and that worked out
Izumi
well too.
Matsumoto, and like biggest Kimagure Orange Road fan out there, and I have a lot of respect for her. Of course, we talked with JP. He was our other major guest, noteworthy guest, and here he sits, probably on the precipice of doing yet another anime lockdown. And we have reached out to JP, and he has stated he wants to come back on, and we will talk a little bit more about the possible second version of anime lockdown. Something tells me that's a certain inevitability at this point.
Hmm.
Maybe we can get a couple more details. I think over the last week, one other thing I've tried to slowly start to ramp up a little bit is promotion within the Anime North community. Anime North, we are an official podcast, or we are official podcast Anime North. That's always been the case in the history of this show. Whenever we've been around, even in the 8 years we were gone, that invite was always open, and I am grateful to. I always said I was grateful to Norm and Eileen McAvoy, for leaving that door open for us to return when the time was right. And it was so easy to slide back into place in 2018. And then we just said we were ready. I just wrote him saying I'm ready to return. And I should state this. I say I and we. And to the listeners out there was always a willingness from everybody else. James, Adam when he was free, Neil, Mo, all the other regulars, and when we set up Kevin, there was always a willingness over those 8 years to eventually return. The willingness had to be on my part, and it wasn't there for much of those 8 years. And that's another story altogether, which, you know, but they kept at me. And then, of course, I had friends also who knew about this show, who never listened to it, by the way, but they knew about it and they knew how much I enjoyed doing it back then. And they kept encouraging me to eventually bring back the show as well. So that's sort of the story of the 8 years of purgatory as well. My only real regret to this point in these 3 years, popularity aside, listenership aside, because that's not in your control, really. All you can just do is go promote it as best you could. We haven't to this point had the Visser brothers back on. They're in at last check, they're in a rather rural area of Ontario, but they could have been on the move last time I spoke with them. But we don't know what their story is at this point. And if they are still in a rural area, their internet may not be the strongest. So they probably wouldn't be able to do an online chat like we can do here. We are spoiled with the type of internet service we have. If here in Canada, good internet in rural areas is a big issue. And you read about it all the time. The major telecoms, Bell, TELUS, Rogers, there doesn't seem to be an urgency to be able to improve that service, improve higher speed internet and reliability in terms of internet in those areas. And others it's gotten to the point where we're begging, where people up there are more than willing to pay more as long as that works for them. And we're here, and I'm reading reports. I think I forgot the name of the service. It's Elon Musk's satellite service. Elon Musk started a satellite service. I don't think it's SpaceX or LinkX or something to that effect, but there have been betas that I've read about, and a lot of the people who have been able to get in on that, they admit, yes, they've paid a fair amount for the hardware and the service, but they're happy with it. It is above minimum expectations.
If you deliver it at the price and stuff like that, you're going to get the customers and stuff like that, even if it is a bit more premium.
Yeah, and that seems to be the case. I think
And
people
that
are just
might,
happy to be able to give their money to somebody who isn't Rogers, Bell, or TELUS.
and it might give them a kick in the behind to get their houses in order, but
Well, all
probably
those,
not.
yeah, maybe not, but all those will end up doing is tax them too. That's what they'll probably keep saying. It's not a matter of them wanting to improve service. It's just they just want to make sure the government gets their cut out of it, and maybe be able to cut them out altogether.
I know we know all the networks have been talking about that, about the streaming services from outside Canada. So
Yeah. Well,
but,
Jesse's talked a lot about that, and it's that type of stuff is still well documented, right?
but thinking back again, since we're celebrating 15 years in that, it's like thinking back to some memories. I was thinking about a few years. I was looking at some of the episodes. I wasn't listening to them because, ironically, I never actually listened to any of the episodes because
You've never heard any of the back episodes? I have to re-listen to them
I've
quite a bit.
I have heard all the episodes that did not feature me. because I'm one of those
Oh yeah,
people
okay.
where it's like if I'm on the thing and I've had that discussion and stuff like that, I don't know, it's just not something I'm going to go back and listen to and stuff like that. And probably the other thing, I don't want to hear my own voice because I'm probably not going to like it.
Oh no, I can understand that completely. I hear my own voice and I always come out thinking, I sound like that.
But I was thinking that we've done so many episodes together from the beginning, Mike, and then sometimes you have those memories of the episodes where we were not on, and I think the one where both of us were not on, and you just set up the mics, we just set them up, was the White Day episode that had Angela, Clarissa, and then Carol and Mel, and I think that was Clarissa was talking about her trip back from Japan. It was a two-parter. That one was in 2008. March
Hmm.
2008 or
We
something
did
like
two
that.
versions of an all girls episode, and then I think we had Angela again
Mhm.
host one a year later in 2009.
Yeah, and
And
those were fun.
I was on the
Different
mic just to
perspective.
intro it, and then I turned off my mic and let them talk.
Hmm.
So I think that's the only time I haven't spoken in any of these recordings. Well, the major recordings aside from the solo shots.
Hmm.
So,
And then
well,
we talk
I mean,
about,
I listened to bits and pieces of various episodes over the years, and sometimes I shake my head because I can't believe we said certain things, or we can't, or the feel of the episodes were so different at the time, and they would be when Adam was involved in most of them, because by his own admission, he knows he's a very dominant character, and we just let them go,
yeah,
right?
no, him and Neil definitely brought the bang to our show. That's for sure. They definitely brought their
Oh, it was
opinions and they
great.
brought everything. So it
It
definitely
was.
added good flavor to it. And it was either a love him or hate him type thing, I'm sure, with some people, depending on what we were talking about.
Mhm, mhm. And sometimes, and sometimes, yeah, they do it just for the sake of getting people angry. And this is sort of one of those things about talk radio, right? There is a line of thinking of being authentic, right? The secret of a lot of good podcasts is for its presenters to be real, to be authentic, to be themselves. Don't be somebody they're not. But we've also learned some of the more successful ones also have caricatures, or at the very least, people who are putting up an act of some sort. Either that, or it's just exaggerations of people. So, so to use another metaphor, it's just people, but you dial them up to 11. This is the way they are, but if you just dial that up exponentially, and their more prominent characteristics just stick out, right?
And instead of getting the calls in, you're just trying to get either the listeners or the emails in.
Mhm. And yes, it's done for shock value. It's done for
Mhm.
entertainment value. But you are like in the end, it's still about the analytics. It's still about getting listeners, right? And don't get me wrong, I have a lot. There is a this, and then we'll really start to talk about the past episodes. Okay, James. There is an envy out there for I do hold a small envy out there for people who do get those listeners, who do get those eyeballs, who do get those watching. And it's tempered by the fact that they do the work to get that. They know something I don't to be able to get that, whether it's just plugging away or certain details or know how about how to do editing or knowing where to promote and knowing how to speak to their possible audience. They know something and they've got it. That's why Trash Taste probably one file, just one YouTube. Forget the audio counterpart, but the YouTube video has more listeners or watchers. We're talking YouTube watchers than the entire history of this podcast combined.
I remember they are definitely popular anime YouTubers.
Mhm.
So you
But
have
they do something else.
you got
They have their
all of them.
brands. They have their brands to work on, right?
Anime Man, I like all of them.
And
And they do
and
bring on some interesting guests. Like they're not your typical guests, but there's some interesting ones that you don't see everywhere. They had a former porn star. They
mhm,
had another popular travelogue YouTuber, Chris Broad, who's abroad in Japan channel, has over 2 million people watching it. And he's always a good conversation and stuff like that. So he just gelled with them instantly. And then I think they did one where they were in drift cars or something like that. So they've done some very interesting off the
and
wall
creative.
stuff.
Oh yeah,
And
very
a lot of it
creative
is
stuff.
about the conversation between all of them because
Mhm.
it isn't always about anime and stuff like that. And
It's just
the other thing is for the YouTube and that you have the regular episode, but sometimes what they'll do is they'll split up some of the episode into mini segments and stuff like that and post them up. So that sometimes gets people to watch certain things and maybe they then go back and listen to the full episode. You never
mhm.
know. So different
It's
way of doing things.
yeah. When I the a couple of episodes, I've listened to 2 or 3 episodes. I don't give myself that much time, I'm afraid. But yeah, they talk about their dilemmas and their headaches about being YouTubers and creating content. Sometimes, yes, they do talk a little bit about their shows, and really, it's a very free flowing conversation with these guys. So they've done something right. I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit about it, but they've done something right. And and for what it's worth, forget the jealousy part. I actually enjoy listening to them as well. I enjoy listening to Anime World Order still every so often, right? The podcasts that have now promoted themselves, Ichimon, which is from Japan Kyo, I've actually listened to a couple episodes from them, which is a really good show and really, really laid back show. Radri in Japan, who one of the other people who interviewed Matt Alt, that's a nice little show as well. There's a lot going out there. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So okay, okay, so let's go down the memories. I'll be honest. As I said, I've listened to bits and pieces. I've forgotten a lot about some of the topics we talked about all the way back in version 1
I
myself.
think I think the one that you'll remember and most of the listeners remember because it went on for a while is we did talk about Nymphet or Kodomo no Jiken and stuff like that. And there were
Yes.
other issues that kind of pervaded that, like Chris Hanley, I believe, and other issues that I know Adam helped us out with on the law side and stuff like that because it was definitely some I guess, touchy subjects, to say the least. And sometimes we went at them more full force, and we've always been knowing that than we should sometimes.
Well, I didn't. Looking, yeah. Now that you bring up that title, now that you bring up Nymphet or Kodomo no Jikan, I mean, put that on, juxtapose that with some of the stuff that's come out recently and some of the questionable titles or in question titles that have
It's
been there.
interesting. This season, there's been two in question titles, and people just continually turned the wheel and talked about them and stuff like that. And it's
And some
been
don't.
interesting.
And some don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because they're worried about, they're worried about whatever backlash there is. That all said, remember what I just said. Do people really listen to us? Right? Who are we outraging out there? Can't outrage anybody if they're not hearing you anyway.
I guess the other question is, are people listening to certain podcasts because they share an affinity for them or the opinions of the presenters and stuff like that? So they're in an echo chamber almost. It makes you wonder.
Oh yes, that's a fair point too. That's a fair point. I mean, sometimes, yeah, we want to have conversations, then we want to have uncomfortable conversations. And I think by my own admission, I'm not totally sure I personally have done a good job with the difficult conversations, right? And I'm just giving it a thought. I don't know if that's really the case, if we've really tackled them, and then how well we've done.
And some of it is our style of podcasting and how we've done the show and stuff like that, where it's more casual, laid back. And as you said, you're a bunch of people sitting around having a conversation, whether it could have been at a cafe or a bar or something like that. And you would have something like that type of conversation happening. It's not exactly what I would call a professional one where yes, we would do some research and stuff like that, but sometimes things happen, you know what I mean? It free flows with conversation. And
Oh
then you
yeah,
come back to it and then you're like, maybe what I said wasn't exactly the right thing. And then you have the discussion again.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the thing about being able to evolve your thinking, and there's nothing wrong with changing your mind and revisiting an opinion and realizing, okay, what I thought was good back then isn't necessarily right now, or isn't necessarily the way I should be looking at it now. Right? That's part of the. I guess that's part of those conversations.
I say to some people, it's like some people that were supposedly living fruitful, sin-free lives 100 years ago probably are thought of as the most sinful people you can think of, and probably us right now that are supposedly full of justice and full of sin-free thinking and stuff. In 100 years, probably the people then are going to think we are terrible people. So the
Oh yeah,
wheel
sure.
keeps on revolving and things
This
keep on changing. So you never know.
this comes on the heels of like the Dr. Zeus Foundation pulling 6 of their books because of imagery that they think wouldn't look good now.
And we've seen that before with other things like remember Barber and stuff like that, the elephant. And
Mhm.
they don't look too kindly, and that's been going on for many years and stuff like that. And it's the colonial thinking that went into those books from way, way back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so like, yeah, what is it? Like Kodomo Jikan back then, redo of Healer now, I suppose.
Or you could say jobless reincarnation as well, since I've been
Sure.
giving you some links to that one, because that one,
And
it feels like every week, different people in different facets, whether it's in Japan or here in North America, having different conversations, and they're coming at it from different perspectives, especially on the Japanese side. So it's like you keep on thinking about that. It's like interesting to think about it.
mhm, mhm. I mean, we talked about it too, but we sort of hinted on it. Well, maybe anime fandom has become, has a link as being a mouthpiece for the alt right. I mean, that. I mean, that was hinted at in Matt Alt's book, and it's been written about.
It's kind of funny when we think about that, don't you think, though, Mike? Because you think about some of the conventions and we think about Anime North and some of the people we meet and stuff like that. I think we're pretty damn progressive people. It's like we're all either in costumes or we're enjoying our hobby and stuff like that. It's like you don't
Yeah,
really
some are
see that.
enjoying
It doesn't
hentai,
feel
some are
like
doing.
it doesn't feel like we see that and stuff like that. I think the most extreme things we saw was the free hugs and then the yaoi guy yelling
Yeah, I was about
yaoi
to
or
say
what.
yaoi and boys love and hentai stuff.
Uh,
Oh boy.
but it was
No,
funny
it's
too.
yeah, and in when you think about it, and when you think about it, it's fandom is. I think I stated this before. Fandom is going against what's considered the establishment at that point in time.
Hmm.
The establishment in the 60s and 70s was fairly right wing, fairly conservative. Much of the 80s as well. And then as time has gone through the last 3 decades, 90s, aughts, now that's flipped over to the other side. The mainstream thinking has turned a little bit more liberal. So so the rage was against that. And once again, this is just fear to believe the idea that fandom is always is always themed on raging against the establishment.
But the question is, does any of our rage outside Japan or our passion and stuff like that, yeah, it has an influence and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they've always said in the anime industry in Japan and stuff like that, it's all about the domestic market and stuff like that. So they
Well,
make
yeah,
what they
and
want, and so a lot of it is based off the light novels and the manga and stuff like that, and video games. So it's like trying to get like a hit out of one of the or two or three of those products and stuff like that, and get it to the domestic market and stuff like that. And anything outside that they've sold is kind of like bonus gravy train, especially on the anime and manga side more so.
yeah. Although you feel you get the start to get the feeling that thinking is sort of changing as well,
Hmm.
right? There is
It's
this.
slowly been changing. I feel like we've been seeing it, but every time it's like you still hear the same things every so often about them surprised seeing the numbers and that. But we do think it's starting to change and stuff like that. And we've seen
Mhm.
that with streaming and stuff like that, whether it be Netflix or Billy or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay, bring up some memories. Bring up some memories since we are talking 15 years.
So
Like
we
anything that
did,
comes to mind. You just brought up a couple and then
I
that
brought
went
up
over.
quite a few. There's another one I can bring up, and that is with the changing times, and especially since we're going to be dating ourselves again, because Discotheque is having their mini stream, I guess, on Monday. It probably will already have passed, but this is
By the
their
time
third
this goes
one.
up, maybe,
Yeah,
maybe not. We'll see. I may
but
put this
yeah,
up
their third one in
completely wrong.
March.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Third
But
one of
it's funny
2021.
thinking about that we could have done maybe like a licensing sort of prediction sort of thing.
Oh, the
And way
pools.
back in version one, when conventions and actual announcements happened at conventions and stuff like that, we did a prediction thing for licenses. I think it was in 2007, and I looked at it. I think I won it, supposedly.
Hmm.
Mo came in second, then you came in third, Mike, and then Dean came in last and stuff
The
like
one
that.
time
And
we did the license pool. Yeah.
yeah, that was summer of 2007, and we were looking at Otakon, we were looking at AX, and all of the conventions and any other announcements they made. And it was an interesting time because I think the streaming still hadn't taken off, and Crunchyroll, I'm not sure if they had started their version, whatever you want to call it, where they weren't exactly legal, right? And
Hmm.
look at we are now, where every season it's just like, here's the anime. That's what
Well, yeah,
Funimation and Crunchyroll. It's like,
basically simulcast, right?
yeah, some of them they announced before, but a lot of them it's just like, here it is, and then it's like day and date. And back then, it obviously was not like that. So it was a fun thing to go to those license, like the panels, and hear what the new announcements are, or even make those guesses and stuff like that way back when. Whereas now, it you can't really do that because it's just day and day. It's like here it is. But the crazier thing is, remember, there wasn't as much anime like it felt like a lot for me and you right back in the aughts,
Hmm.
but it wasn't as much because we were still looking at some of what people would consider the old stuff. We were looking at stuff from the 80s and 90s too, so we had a lot. But now it's like kind of crazy because everyone is now focused more on the new stuff, but they're producing so much anime per
Hmm.
season, like so much that it's kind of crazy anyone could watch a whole season of anime and keep up with all those episodes.
Yeah, I know.
And
And our consumption has changed a little bit too because the model back then was similar to what was common in Japan. So a single volume of maybe no more than 4 episodes.
well, we were actually living the life though, remember, Mike?
And
Because
that was actually
remember,
better.
we were usually Japan was 2 episodes and
I
stuff like
know,
that.
I
We were
know.
like,
We're like
but we were
it was
lucky.
a version. I didn't say it was exactly, but it was a version of it. And then
The other thing though was, as you said, it's like I know you were more you got into VHS, but I got in just as that they were flipping to DVD, so I luckily didn't have to worry too much on the VHS end where you had to choose between dub or sub.
yeah, they were
But
separate
as we
tapes.
said, they don't have it on the back of the box anymore because it's just standard. But remember when it was oh, you can flip between your dub or your sub. So it's nice to experience it in different ways. And then they had different extras and interactive menus and stuff like that. So you could change things on the fly and you never used to be able to do that. So that's where it's like, okay, I can stomach that and stuff like that. And the cost for us up here in Canada, where was even more astronomical because usually you'd have 3 episodes, 4 episodes, or 5 episodes, 29.95 or
Mhm.
24.95 US. And then a lot of the when they converted it to Canada, depending on who you went to, sometimes you could see some eye popping numbers before tax, like $40 to $50.
I know. I know. Sucks to be
So you,
Canadian in that
so
sense.
you had to actually choose. So that's why when people are saying, "Well, these prices are insane," and blah blah blah, like once they went to the season sets over a decade ago and Funimation kind of started that trend and stuff like that, the late aughts, and everyone started following suit, it was kind of like a race to the bottom because
Well,
it's
that
not
was
just the MSRB of $60 or what have you. It's like they're discounted even more, obviously, either on Right Stuff or other retail purveyors. And so it's like, wow, this is really cheap compared to what we used to have and stuff
Mhm.
like that. And
Like I
even
think
with the Canadian exchange, if you can't get a Canadian retailer, like for example, Discotheque, we're still getting like they're pricing something, for example, EPO. They're doing it in 3 sets, and if you get it on Right Stuff with a discount and all that stuff and pre-order it, it's $30 American, and it's supposed to be, I think, 50 American. And we were getting it from Geneon. It was 5 episodes a disc at $30 per disc. So you're saving like it's kind of crazy that you could be paying $30 for 5 episodes versus with discount and all that other stuff, $30 American. And even with the Canadian exchange rate and stuff like that, it still boggles the mind. Like it's a really good deal. But I can
oh yeah.
see, well, like if you've been buying it recently, I could understand, right? But
hmm It's well, as I said, and then it started to shift over there, and in some ways, maybe that's where some of our binginess started. I don't know.
and then
Just
it's some
looking
of the
back on it.
streaming too, right?
Mhm.
Because
Well, there was
then
this
it
fear.
allows you to choose so many different programs then now, because then it's like it's just a plethora of shows are at your fingertips.
Mhm.
Because it
Well,
used to be we had to choose. It's like, do I really want this?
I'm just wondering. Like you said, race to the bottom at the time. Do you think anime got devalued in those season sets? I'm not told. I'm just calling it basically. Like it's one of those to me. It's well, maybe it's a you. It couldn't be helped type mentality. It had to go this route because mainstream mainstream shows already by that point were available in seasons
And
on
that's
DVD.
correct. Yeah, and they
So,
definitely were way cheaper than anime and stuff like that. But I would say anime, you're looking at a niche price, stuff like that. So I would expect it to have a higher price, obviously, than a mainstream show and stuff like that for a
mhm.
season set
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff like
I
that.
mean you hit that on
And
the you
and I
did hit
still
something.
feel that they could do either a lesser discount to get closer to MSRB, but I would be willing to pay a bit more American to get some more money to something like Discotheque because they definitely price theirs at a very competitive rate, I would say, in low rate for some shows where I think they could maybe charge a bit more. But it
That
depends on
makes
the series. From series to series, they change their approach and stuff like that.
that makes you a noble fan because obviously there's people who will try to avoid pain altogether, and there is there is that piracy that still exists within our fandom.
And we could look at it, for example, Aniplex. There, people like obviously Bandai Visual went out the door and stuff like that, but Aniplex is still with us. But they did have the shows and they do have the premium price and stuff like that. They've only released Demon Slayer as a standard edition through Funimation, stuff like that. We'll see if that happens with any other shows in the future that they have a cheaper standard edition. But even for their what we would consider very expensive sets and stuff like that, it's almost like if it was back in the day and we were buying all the volumes of a certain show and then you were paying that 120 American dollars and stuff like that. So if it's something I want to get, then I can say yes, I'm going to do it and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So like for the main Fate one, I said yes, I'm going to do it, even though it's a little more expensive. Even the movies, which yes, it's kind of crazy what you can charge for some of those.
Yeah, and as I said, I can consider you one of the more noble fans, and there are
But
enough.
I'm not
And
getting much from them. But it's something I have to look at, and that's what people do. They made their decisions back in the day, and people still do now. You don't need to buy everything.
yeah, you can't buy everything. I mean, I'm kind of thankful. Like here I was back in the day, the biggest one of the bigger DVD buyers, and now I have a whole boxes and boxes, literally, of DVDs and manga that right now are kind of hard for me to get to because they're all stacked up. And you don't really regret it. It's just that's the way it was. And I keep saying, would I continue buying DVDs now? The short answer is not really. It would have to be something compelling. But I'm also thankful for the streaming services now that are there,
Hmm.
like the Crunchyrolls, the Funimations, which I don't really go with at the moment, Netflix for sure, and of course their further involvements in said industries. And I guess those are future conversations still to come.
Yeah, no,
Because
if it's
I think
something we love and we want to support, obviously we're going to put some money down and we'll
I
buy
have
it.
no. I mean, look, your subscriptions to these services help in their own way as well.
Hmm.
So, okay, what else stuck out over the years? What else stuck out, at least from version one? One or two more things, and maybe I'll will because we've been here for like 45 some odd minutes already. Boy, time flies.
No, I think I've mentioned all the memories and stuff like that. As I said, the many people we talked with, talking at the Comic Den with the Vista Brothers and even their old
Norm.
home and stuff like that. And it was great being in the Comic Den doing that one episode as they were finishing that up. And that was like a local institution. And you won't see many of those in the future around here or in any
That's
other
why we,
places in North
yeah,
America. It's like a memory you'll never forget.
and it's strange in some ways. People will probably question why we talk about comic book shops or specialty shops in Toronto, because in many ways that's where it helped. That's where the fandom really nurtured itself back then,
And some of them
right?
aren't selling
Like
anime anymore, or some of them had to move to other locations or whatever.
like
Like things
you
change.
have your comic dens, beguilings, uh, silver snails. Name keep going. With
Mary Tarantula, Anime Extreme, 1 Million Comics. It's
like
like
these are
Game Shop had some anime back in the day. They don't do that anymore. They're just on the video games and stuff like that.
but
But
these are names that are synonymous with it in Toronto back then. And I'm sure wherever you're listening, if the city is big enough, or if the pocket is big enough, there's a version of that in your city. Even Kat Callahan mentioned as much in New Mexico, I believe, when she hung out at an old comic book shop
and we were blessed that some of them were like the ones in downtown Toronto were within walking distance. So
of each
some
other. Yeah.
people could go basically down on the go train, basically either from the east or west or wherever you
Mhm.
were coming, and maybe spend a day in Toronto and get some exercise, walk around and go and see what's in the different shops and maybe buy something.
Oh yeah, and there's one name I did forget to mention in all of this: Kiki Y.
I was thinking Kiki Y in Chinatown. Yeah, we should have
Yeah,
remembered.
Kiki Y was, and this is going back in history for Toronto anime fans or those interested in what it was like here in Toronto. Kiki Y was probably ahead of its time in terms of in terms of memorabilia, especially imported memorabilia, art books, um,
CDs and
accessories,
stuff like that. Yeah,
CDs. Well, keep in mind, well, the
CDs
CDs
I
are,
know, depending where you get them from, I know, but
you
not
know,
all.
and but they were, I would say, pioneers, so to speak, in terms of the of merchandising, or really going at selling the merchandise stuff in relation to anime fandom. They were ahead of the curve in that sense, right? And that now these days that seems to be what dominates the physical merchandise in terms of anime, figures, costumes, accessories. Kiki Y to many Torontonians, to many of the fandom in Toronto, that was the store that really pioneered all that, the memorabilia side. And that's where, and that seems to be, as I said, that's where the physical merchandise seems to be at this point in time, right? It's not really as much on DVDs. But to a degree, it's still with the books. The manga, the physical books have in many respects endured, but it's more dominated now by figures,
And it's
right?
interesting because I'm thinking about the other one, and it's come more into prevalence, and they've helped Anime North too. Is Navito World, and they've based their whole business on figures and
And
becoming an
models.
official distributor for Canada and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
their main physical store is based in Toronto and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just in Chinatown as well,
hmm
right?
Just around the corner from Anime Extreme.
hmm So there's where it goes. So those are your memories,
Yeah,
or pretty
no,
much.
a lot of them are those memories and stuff like that. So, what about yourself, Mike?
They're a little bit more blurry over 15 years. I mean, as I said, I read the synopsis of a lot of the old episodes. Yes, I remember the license pool, but there's another story there, and long time listeners have yet to call me out on it. I see you smiling there in the videos, so I know what I know you know what I'm referring to.
Mm.
But I guess anybody else will just have to find it, and no, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But the license pool was a lot of fun for what it was. It was just for bragging rights,
Yeah, no,
no
it was
betting.
a bit of fun, and like a lot of other podcasts and other things we had done it at the time, and people would have their fun discussions in club rooms and whatever way back then, doing those type of things, and you couldn't really get that happening right now. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, well,
and I
so
said
yeah, you
some
wonder.
people who are watching the discotheque streams, they might have a little fun with that, but it's not as big as it used to be, obviously, because
Well,
it just
it does have me wondering, like when we were watching Memories a couple weeks ago, who would have been watching? Would it have been old school fans like us? Or like I mean, how many of those fans would have been fans in it within the last, oh, let's say 15 years? Like the history of the show. Maybe the furthest back you can go is people who got into it in right in 2000.
and
Like
I
because
think
by that point we were there, but we had been around for a couple of years already. So I think we'll have to go a little further. So mid aughts. So around the time this podcast started. So 15 years, not 20. How many fans would have been in watching that?
I
Fans who
think
would have.
there's definitely some old school fans and definitely some fans from my generation, your generation, Mike. And I think even maybe there might be a few younger fans and stuff like that that were watching that. And that's because someone either latched them onto a show that Discotheque released and then they became a fan of just some of the stuff that Discotheque released because they have a lot of different shows now in the catalog. And they release quite a bit of anime now, like 5 releases a month and stuff like that. So sometimes
Mhm,
something might tickle their fancy, they go and they enjoy it and stuff like that. And this one, the way they've been doing it with the online stuff and even the memories thing, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, well, why not? Let's give it a roll because they showed the passion and they brought the passion. And we heard it
and
even in the dub.
yeah, and we talked about it when we talked at length about Memories a couple weeks ago. It
hmm
was like if you weren't there at the time it was out, then that's fine. But everyone points to it as one of the masterpieces of the medium, and that you owe it to yourself to understand it. And you understand, and everybody who was involved in that dub understood the benchmark that Memories was in terms of the industry and treated it as such. Right? I mean, that was the theme we used. So we used that type of wording when talking about the production of that dub. if you remember, right? And all the care they put into that, and why you're not totally sure, or why I'm not sold we may ever really see a discotheque dub again, or at least a reminder why we can't have these things often.
Well, I'm sure
Because
we'll see more doves. It's just it has to be the right project, as we know, and
for
also has to be the
budgetary,
right length and stuff like that. Whether it's an OVA or a movie, like
mm-hmm.
series are a tougher sell and stuff like that because they run lean and mean. They don't have all the money in the world like Sony, of course.
Well, yeah, and then well, okay. So, any real memories? I mean, as I said, I go through the episode synopsis, and sometimes I forget a lot about the episodes themselves. I see names that I don't recognize anymore. I fully admit, and maybe I have to re-listen to. It makes me regret not making like more detailed show notes because I didn't. They were just like back then. The summaries were probably no more than 5 lines. But then you see how I'm doing them now on the site. They're like pages long, time stamped stuff, time stamped summaries, very detailed stuff, which I now know that the one or two people who listen to this show actually appreciate. I mean,
And
that's
that's a
that's
standard I know with many other podcasts and stuff like that. And
and what's
why
a standard?
we talked about Trash Taste, they do it, but they do it, as I said as well. And I'm sure some other ones that use video do it too, where they actually split it up, right? And make it into their own
And
videos. And that way
it's
a person can go there.
clickable cues and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And as I said, they do a good job. And so we're just kind of getting onto it. And I think that's a trend that developed over those 8 years we were gone. It was sort of there when we started. I mean, I think AWO has done it for years too. And then I never really latched onto it personally. And even as we came back in 2018, I wasn't quite there yet either. But then as the pandemic wore on, and I think it culminated with the Mad Alt talk, that's where we really started being detailed with the time stamping. And I think and to us, and this is one of those reflections, keep in mind, okay, and I guess that now I can bring back a memory. The episodes back then in version 1, we taped them, and I made it a point to put those episodes right out there within an hour or two of the taping, and that's why you got the four line summary, right? You got to hear them warts and all, with all our stammering, ahs, buts, you likes. And these days, whenever we tape an episode, we tape them, and this is now we're going to give a little bit of behind the scenes information about the show and how we do it these days. We'll tape it on a Friday or Saturday, but it doesn't come out for a few days after that. Like the turnaround, if it's 48 hours, that's considered amazing. But it's more likely to be 72, 3 days before we actually put the episode up there. It's because, and I'm doing all the editing. And this is not to toot a horn because I just don't want to, burden the others with the task. They have their own lives. James is still working. Mo is still working. Kevin is still working. Jeff is still working. I'm not. I have time to do this. So I actually go through the episodes and I actually do edit it now. This is something has only been a recent development for this show. It's only been a recent development over the last year. I learned the joy of separate tracks. That's really what it is. Having everybody on their own tracks and be able to just splice it together. And I think the last year, like the pandemic sucks. Make no mistake about it. It sucks for the world. It's brought out the best and the worst that society has to offer. And I mean that. I'm not kidding when I say that. It's also probably been the greatest blessing for this podcast, I'm afraid. Because it's given me time to work on it and improve it, to search out those interviews, and maybe be able to finally catch up on some of the more recent anime. Although I define recent as something within the last 10 years. Urokoi was a couple years ago. Toradora was around the time the Purgatory began. Right? I mean, I'm going to have to make sure I get the title right because I know I got it wrong in the recording. I mean, I'm going to try to watch Great Passage because I refer to it as Secret Passage or Hidden Passage. No, it's Great Passage. I know Great Passage is some years old. I think it's like at least 4 years old.
And that was on
After watching
Noitamina and
them.
Amazon and
And,
Discotech released it physically. So
and then that's based on a movie that I watched that was 7 years old, I think. And on and on. So I'm talking about animes that at least were within the last decade. But that still doesn't quite get me there. Like now we're talking what the plans are, right? But as I said, this is, I think, the best. I guess that's how I made use of the time off in the pandemic from where I usually work. I've caught up here, at least in terms of how we do it. Now, maybe the key thing is to let others, is to make sure others listen. So, if you are a Facebook regular on the unofficial Anime North page, there's like a bunch of pages dedicated to Anime North, but there's at least one unofficial one, and I did do a promo for that, but I know there hasn't been too many listeners based on that. Yes, we're going to try and swing the Anime North Association a little bit more in the future. To that end, I know I've reached out to members of their social media team. So hopefully in the future we can actually get people who are actually in the know, more inside track on Anime North, regularly doing it, and maybe we'll be able to talk to Norm online. Pretty sure he's savvy enough to be able to, uh, be able to talk to us. He's somebody we would like to see how he's holding up in all of this. Yeah, we're looking to get JP back. We're looking to just keep going. I don't know. As I said, it's nice to get listeners, but we have to be true to who we are too, right? So the other thing is, are we going video, right? I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure I still have a face for radio myself. Plus, I don't think, as far as I know, not all of us have a good camera setup of any sort, a good webcam setup, or either that, or it's not, or in the case of Kevin, right now it's non-existent. So, as much as I think it would, as much as I believe the idea that it would be good for us to have a YouTube or Twitch presence at the moment, or a YouTube and Twitch presence, period, at the moment, that's what I was trying to say. Maybe that's not totally in the cards. And I don't know, like, I get it. There is a trend of simulcasting radio. Remember, we're based on this show is meant to be inspired by talk radio, and talk radio has been simulcasted, or as I think a catchword is these days, multi-platformed, right? But it isn't as simple as showing the speakers constantly on camera. You have to do more with that. You have to be able to intersperse other images into that, which was at the least. And that was something that shows like Primetime Sports tried doing initially, right? It wasn't just showing Bob McCowan sitting at a microphone wearing his glasses. They tried to show, little videos of whatever they were talking about interspersed in all that. That's the minimum you should be doing. But maybe that's hot. Those are production values that right now, I fully admit, maybe we don't have. But then again, remember this talk we've had about why I prefer just doing it on audio, right? You can flesh out your narrative a lot better. You can tell your story. You can have your conversations and really flesh them out and lengthen them to 1 hour, 6 minutes. You can't really, if we were doing this on a video medium, you'd be a little bit more constricted by its mere existence for whatever reason. Because sometimes you have to be able to tell your story a lot faster, and sometimes you're not able to, or at least to the effectiveness one would want. That's one side. The other side of the coin is that I also get is, well, it's more centralized, and that's probably why YouTube videos are able to get their viewerships. It's because it's on YouTube. It's in one spot. YouTube's a huge website, but it is one spot to start. And once you're at least within those doors, within the surfing on that website, surfing on the YouTube app, you're at least in the door, and you might be able to catch somebody, finally have that algorithm smile down on you. Podcasting itself tends to be more decentralized. I think that's sort of one of its flaws. It didn't really have a central repository. It's very fragmented, and maybe that's also that's partly its beauty, because it's partly its beauty and it's partly its weakness. Like there's a case for both, because centralizing it would probably mean selling out on it. And you hear these stories of, you hear stories of Amazon and Spotify buying up podcast networks, not just individual podcasts, but sometimes for whole networks to put on their thing. And maybe it ends up losing the whole essence that maybe podcasting was supposed to be. The fear of commercialization. This sounds familiar if you're an anime fan, doesn't it? Because that's a big part of the discussions and the debates that go on in fandom. And probably is a big part of its divide. Well, podcasting in its own way has a version of it itself. Maybe that's what we're facing. I don't know. But I'm just thinking about where we're going. Right? Or either that or I'm just talking to friends, because I'm not totally sure who else I'm talking to out there. What do you think?
I think we'll see where the conversation takes us, as always, and stuff like that. And it's definitely been a ride for the last 15 years or so, even with the elongated break and stuff like that. And we've learned things, as you said, along the way and stuff like that. And it's slowly but surely and stuff like that, and we do things on our terms and always have.
I think that's probably the key thing. I think we just do this on our terms, not have to worry about anything else. If it's just us and our closest friends listening to this show, that's probably as much as we can do. And we can and that's fine, right? Of course we're going to try and get more listeners. If you're hearing this and think you know somebody who would be able to enjoy this as well, pass it on. Or we'll give the information at the end. It's a bit of a ramble right now, isn't it? I don't know. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed coming back for after, like, when we came back 3 years ago, James. What was it like? Like, did it feel like we could eventually, like, I'm not going to say it felt like we could quickly get back in the saddle. I think it was clear we weren't fully off of it, that we could like when we did that first recording back in February 2018, that
Hmm.
return recording.
We
It
still
was
had to
just
find people, as we said.
we
We
still
had
I
to
think we had
figure
to
out, and
get our feet back under us. I think
And
that's
then
how it
I
felt.
think it was nice to do a few different things, as we said. Like we did some different interviews and stuff like that, where you decide, you know what, I'm going to see if I can get Fred Shaw and see if he wants to do a quick interview or something like that. And that
Yeah,
was
and it
nice.
ended up being
And
closer
then
to
it led us to think about maybe doing some small ones with others. Now, obviously, JP was on one of our regular episodes, but it was nice to reach out to him and gracious enough to come and talk with us about uh, Lockdown Con,
Mhm.
and then a few other things. And then the other thing, of course, was talking to Matt Alt and reaching out to him, and that was more obviously one on one, and then myself along for the ride for that. And then, as you said, with Kat Callahan and stuff like that, which came from the idea of me passing on that article to you and your care about core and thinking, you know what, this would be something nice to do, have someone else who cares about it just as much as you do, of course.
Yeah. As I said, the pandemic has been a blessing for this show, a curse for the rest of the world, but a blessing for this show. And for reference, when we started the pandemic series, I think we were on episode, like, in the version 2 era, we had only gotten to, I'm trying to look it up now. We had only gotten to episode 17 of the of this version 2 era. We're already up to episode 36. We've doubled the output of version 2 already. So I guess that's worth something. And I think these almost 20 episodes. Well, 18 episodes, I guess. Oops. What is it? 18 episodes. Yeah, it is about 18 episodes. These 18 episodes have been by far the it feels like when we were doing those shows weekly back then
And that's
in
what I
version
was
1.
thinking too.
It feels like that in some ways, and a little bit more different because you know if you have another way of doing it now, right?
And we
Like,
are
those episodes were
taking
just
a
different.
seasonal break too, because we were doing weekly episodes. And then when summer came around, we'd maybe
We
do
took
one or two, but we'd relatively take a break and stuff like
mhm,
that. Whereas
but
this, we've been going pretty consistently throughout the year and stuff like that.
we've been doing it bi-weekly, right? And then, of
So
course,
it's
you're listening to
almost feels
this.
the same.
Almost feels the same. Almost. It's a little different too.
And then, as you said, we've had a few in between here and there. Like we've had the Mad Alt. You did the one with Cat Callahan that went in between
We
there.
did a
And
few
then
we did a digester too.
we talked to Angela. And so.
We've talked to Jesse.
Hmm.
We talked to Jesse 2 times. So, I guess the best we can do is just keep going. So, um, we did mention future plans. We'll try and talk a little bit more Anime North and try and have a few more Anime North personalities do the show a little more now. Really start acting like the official podcast of Anime North. That's a story in itself, why we haven't. And some people will even debate if we even are. I'll join in on the debate, I suppose. There are other people who we've wanted to talk to from various YouTube channels, and we'll try and get them on because I know some of the stuff they offer are really interesting. And one thing I am trying to work on now. If you remember Anime Pacific, there's one of the hosts of Anime Pacific, a podcast back then when we first came on, has started a new one as well. Dane, we've been in touch with, so we're hoping to talk with him at length, and maybe get Daryl Surratt to finally do the show as well. And I want to talk with both of them at the same time and see what their experiences have been like podcasting on and off. Well, on and off, I guess, between Dane and myself, or all the way through, as is the case with Daryl, throughout these 15 years. That's a story a conversation I know we want to do in the near future, and we're just trying to see if we could get our ducks in a row, or get on the same page to be able to do that. Daryl hinted that I reached out to them in the New Year's episode of Anime World Order. Yeah, it is true. We are trying to arrange for something to celebrate our 15 years on since the beginning. I'm not going to say 15 years on the air. As I said, we had that 8-year break, so we can talk about it then. And maybe we'll try a few other creative things. But as I said, James and I really just want to take some time to reminisce about 15 years since the very first episode. And I know there's other stuff that's worth talking about. I know when we come back on next week, the 10th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake will have just passed. I know there's other stuff we've been watching and reading. We'll talk about that. I know James is chomping at the bit. I know at length one other story that made major news this week here in Toronto is the final verdict from the Yonge Street van attack, which we mentioned 3 years ago when we formally announced that we were bringing back Anime Roundtable fully at Anime North. There was a verdict in that. It's a full guilty verdict. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that, because something tells me Jeff and Kevin and Mo will have a say about what happened there. So those are basically what you guys have to look forward to when episode 37 comes up in a week's time, I guess. But thanks for sitting around for a little bit just to hear James and I share our own memories of having to do this for the last 15 years. And go ahead.
I was just thinking, Mike, I was like, we must have done it in true Anime Roundtable fashion, because I think we were thinking of just doing some reminiscing and making it a digest of sorts. And instead, we have over an hour of discussion, from podcasting to memories to everything else in between. And it's always fun doing that, because you never know where we're going to go.
Sure, this could be for all I know, it'll cut off. Not likely. Nothing's guaranteed, though. Well, thanks for listening. That's all we got to talk about right now. If you like what you heard, or want to give us some feedback, it would be appreciated. We'd like to know that there are listeners out there. You can reach us via email, animeroundtable@gmail.com. We are on Twitter and Instagram @Anime Roundtable. And you can hear 15 years worth of episodes, minus 8 in the middle. AnimeRoundtable.com is our website with all of our past episodes and show notes. Once again, typically we do episodes once every other week, but as we're doing this week, once in a while we'll just do something special on the off weeks as well. But if you are enjoying what you're hearing and want to make sure that you won't miss any other episodes, don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you can leave us a review, leave us a good one because, well, one, leave us a review, and two, we hope it's a good one because it'll help this show appear for others who might be interested in listening as well. And I guess that's all that's on our minds. Thanks for listening. And we'll talk to you next week.